the family meeting my siblings called to present me with the fair agreement, my brother slid a document across the table and said, "We've talked it over, all of us, and we think this is right. You lived with Dad rent-free for 6 years. That was your compensation for helping out. So the estate gets split 3 ways among the rest of us, and you sign away any claim. It's only fair, Delia. You already got yours." My 3 siblings nod in unison. And I looked at the document, and I said, "Before I sign anything, there's a letter Dad left with his lawyer that he asked to be read if this exact conversation ever happened. I think you should hear what he predicted you do." The nodding stopped. Let me back up. Because to understand why our father left a letter predicting his own children's betrayal, you have to understand the 6 years I gave him, and the 4 siblings who gave nothing, and the specific injustice of having your sacrifice recast as your payment. My name is Delia Frost. I'm 44 years old, and I spent 6 years as the sole caregiver for our dying father, while my 3 siblings lived their lives untouched. And when he died, those same siblings ganged up to force me out of the inheritance entirely, arguing that the free housing of living in Dad's home, while I nursed him around the clock, had already been my compensation. This is the story of that betrayal, the father who saw it coming, and the 50th and final reckoning in a long line of families who mistook the caregiver for the fool. Let me tell you about the 6 years first, because my siblings spent a great deal of energy trying to erase them, and they were the truth of everything. Our father, Walter, was diagnosed with a degenerative illness when he was 70, the kind that unfolds over years, demanding more and more care as it strips away more and more of the person. And when the diagnosis came, our family faced the question every family faces: who would care for him? There were 4 of us children. My older brother, Grant, successful and busy. My sister, Maribel, with her own family and her own life. My brother, Colton, always chasing something, never available. And me, Delia, divorced, my own kids grown, with the flexibility and, more than that, the willingness. It wasn't really a discussion. It never is in these families. It was simply assumed in the silent arithmetic of who's expendable that I would be the one. My siblings had important lives. I had a life that, in their estimation, could be sacrificed. And so I sacrificed it. I moved into Dad's house to care for him, and I stayed for 6 years until he died. Let me describe what those 6 years actually were, because my siblings would later reduce them to 2 words: free housing. And I need you to understand the obscenity of that reduction. I gave up my own home and my own independence to move into Dad's house. I became, over 6 years, a full-time nurse, cook, housekeeper, medication manager, and companion to a man who needed more of all of it every single month. I learned to manage his illness, his medications, his diet, his mobility, his decline. I did the physical labor of caring for a failing body, the lifting, the bathing, the cleaning, the intimate, undignified work that his illness demanded and that no one talks about. I woke through the night for years whenever he needed me. I gave up dating, travel, career advancement, my own social life, 6 years of my own one and only life, to keep our father cared for and comfortable in home instead of in a facility. I did it out of love and out of duty, and because someone had to, and because that someone was always only going to be me. And my siblings, they visited, occasionally. Grant came for the holidays, made a show of concern, and left. Maribel called sometimes, sent the occasional care package that let her feel involved without being involved. Colton showed up when he needed something, usually money. For 6 years, the 3 of them contributed almost nothing to Dad's actual care. A few visits, some sporadic money that Grant in particular liked to mention as though it equaled my 6 years, and a great deal of expressed appreciation that cost them nothing. They lived their lives, unburdened, while I carried our father to the end. And they told themselves and everyone else that they did what they could given their busy, important lives. Here's the thing about the free housing, since it became the centerpiece of their case against me. Yes, I lived in Dad's house during those 6 years, because I was caring for him in it 24 hours a day. It was not a perk. It was the logistical necessity of round-the-clock caregiving. I didn't live rent-free in a vacation home. I lived at my patient's bedside, on call every hour of every day, my own life boxed up in storage. Calling that compensation is like calling a firefighter's time inside a burning building, a free tour of the property. But my siblings needed a way to argue that I'd already been paid, and free housing was the fiction they built to do it. Let me tell you about our father, and about his foresight, because Walter, even declining, even dying, saw his children clearly, and what he saw, he prepared for. Dad was not a wealthy man, but he had an estate, the house primarily, which was paid off and worth real money, plus some savings. And over the 6 years I cared for him, Dad watched. He watched which child was at his bedside, and which children were living their lives. He watched me give up everything for him, and he watched his other 3 children visit occasionally and call it devotion. And Dad, who was sharp until near the very end, understood something about his own children that grieved him. He knew that when he died, they would come for the estate, and he knew they would try to cut out the daughter who'd cared for him, because he knew their characters. And he knew that people who give nothing are often the greediest when the giving is over. So Dad prepared, quietly, without making a fuss, in the way of a careful parent protecting the child who'd protected him. First, he made a will. Clear one, drafted with his longtime lawyer, that recognized my caregiving. It did not cut out my siblings, Dad wasn't vindictive, but it left me a larger share, the house in particular, in explicit recognition of the 6 years I'd given him and the sacrifice that represented. He wrote his reasoning into it, that his daughter Delia had given up her own life to care for him, and that it was right and just that she receive more, and that this was his clear and freely made decision. Second, and this is the part that reveals how well Dad knew his children, he anticipated that my siblings would contest it. He knew they'd argue undue influence, knew they'd claim I'd manipulated him, knew they'd try to recast my caregiving as either self-interested scheming or as already compensated. And so Dad did what the wisest people in these stories do. He left a letter with his lawyer to be read if, and only if, his other children tried to cut me out or contest the will. A letter in which he addressed their betrayal directly, in his own words, in advance. He told me about none of this in detail. He simply said, once near the end, holding my hand, "Delia, I've made sure you're taken care of. And I've made sure that when your brothers and sister try to take it from you, and they will try, I'll have something to say about it, even if I'm not here to say it. I know my children, all 4 of you. I know exactly which ones will show up at the end and which ones will show up for the reading of the will. Don't you worry. I've seen it coming for years, and I've handled it. I didn't fully understand him at the time. I would. Let me tell you how the betrayal unfolded, because it unfolded fast, and it unfolded exactly as Dad predicted. Dad died peacefully at home, with me holding his hand, as he wanted, a death made gentle by 6 years of my care, a fact my siblings would find deeply inconvenient to remember. And almost immediately, before he was even in the ground, my siblings began to coordinate. I could feel it, the calls between them that didn't include me, the sudden alignment, the shift from grief to strategy. They had smelled the estate, and they were organizing. And what they organized was a united front to force me out. Their argument, which they'd clearly workshopped among themselves, was elegant in its cruelty. I had lived in Dad's house for 6 years, rent-free, and that housing was my compensation for helping out. Therefore, the estate, the house, the savings should be split among the 4 of us equally, or better yet, among the 3 of them, since I'd already received my share in the form of 6 years of free accommodation. They recast my 6 years of unpaid, life-consuming labor as a benefit I'd received, a perk I'd enjoyed, and argued that having already been paid in housing, I had no further claim. 3 of them aligned against one of me. That's the part that cut deepest, not the greed, but the coordination. I found out just how coordinated by accident, and it's a moment I'll never forget. A few weeks after Dad died, I stopped by Grant's house to drop off some of Dad's things, and the 3 of them were there, Grant, Maribel, Colton, in the kitchen, and they didn't hear me come to the door. And I heard Grant say, "The key is she signs before she talks to a lawyer. Once she signs the waiver, the will doesn't matter, whatever Dad put in it. So we frame it as keeping the peace, we all present a united front, and we make her feel like she's being greedy if she doesn't sign. Don't let her go off and think about it alone." And Maribel said, "What if she asks about the house?" Dad always said, and Grant cut her off. "Dad's gone, it's 3 against 1. If we all say the free housing was her payment and we say it together, she'll cave. She always caves. She's the one who goes along to keep everyone happy. That's why it's going to work." I stood at that door and I understood that my siblings had studied me, had built their entire scheme around my lifelong role as the one who goes along, the accommodating one, the peacekeeper. They weren't just ambushing me. They'd weaponized my own character against me, the exact softness that had made me the caregiver in the first place. She always caves. That's why it's going to work. I backed away from the door before they saw me, and I drove home shaking, not just with hurt, but with a cold new clarity about what I was actually facing. This wasn't grief-fueled bickering that would blow over. It was a plan. Calculated, rehearsed plan, built on the assumption that I was too soft to fight. My siblings had gotten together and decided, as a group, to take from the sister who'd cared for their father the recognition he'd wanted her to have. He'd chosen each other, and the money, over me and over fairness, and they'd done it as a team, which made the betrayal feel less like a disagreement and more like an ambush by the people who were supposed to be my closest allies in the world. And now I knew the shape of the ambush in advance, which meant that when I stopped being the woman who caves, they'd have no idea what had changed. Let me tell you about the midpoint, the moment I nearly signed, because they almost got me. My siblings presented their case as a family agreement, a document, drafted by them, in which I would waive my claim to the estate in exchange for their acknowledgement that I'd been a big help with Dad. They framed signing it as the mature, family-preserving thing to do, the way to avoid an ugly fight, the path that would keep us all close. And they applied the pressure that families apply. That Dad would want us to get along, that fighting over money was beneath us, that I was being greedy or divisive if I didn't just sign and keep the peace. 3 voices, coordinated, telling me that the fair and loving thing was to give up everything. And I almost did it. I want to be honest about that, because the pressure was enormous, and it hit every button a lifetime of being the accommodating one had installed in me. I was exhausted, 6 years of caregiving, then grief, and now this, and I didn't have the energy for a war with my own siblings. And part of me, the part they were counting on, thought, maybe they're right, maybe I should just keep the peace, maybe the house isn't worth losing my whole family over. I had the pen in my hand. I was ready to sign away 6 years, and Dad's clear wishes to avoid being the difficult one. And then I thought about Dad, about his hand in mine near the end. "I've made sure you're taken care of. When they try to take it from you, and they will, I'll have something to say about it." And I realized that signing their agreement wouldn't just cost me the inheritance. It would betray my father's explicit, careful wishes, the wishes of a man who'd seen this exact moment coming and prepared for it out of love for me. Dad had fought, from beyond his own death, to make sure I was recognized. If I signed my siblings' document to keep the peace, I would be undoing his last act of love, surrendering the protection he'd built for me, letting his careful foresight be defeated by my exhaustion. I could not do that to him or to myself. I put down the pen. And I called Dad's lawyer. Here's what I found. Dad's lawyer, a man named Theodore Ashby, who'd handled Dad's affairs for decades, confirmed everything Dad had hinted at. There was a will, valid and clear, leaving me the larger share in the house, with Dad's written reasoning recognizing my caregiving. My siblings' family agreement had no power against a valid will. It was simply a document they hoped to trick or pressure me into signing, because they knew that if I signed away my claim voluntarily, the will wouldn't matter. The whole scheme depended on getting my signature before I understood what Dad had actually left me. And there was the letter. Ashby confirmed it. Dad had left a letter to be read if his other children attempted to cut me out or contest the will, a letter addressing their betrayal directly. Your father, Ashby told me, was one of the more clear-eyed clients I've had. He told me, years before he died, exactly what your siblings would do. He said, and I remember it well, Theodore, 3 of my children will gang up on the 4th, the one who's caring for me, and try to cut her out by pretending her sacrifice was a salary. I want to be ready for them. And he wrote the letter. He's been ready for this meeting for years. I chose to reveal it the way it needed to be revealed, at the family meeting where my siblings intended to force me to sign, in front of all of them, with Dad's own voice answering their scheme. Let me tell you about that meeting. My 3 siblings, aligned and confident, gathered to present me with their fair agreement. Grant, the eldest, did the talking, sliding the document across the table with the practiced reasonableness of a man who'd rehearsed. They talked it over, all of them, and they thought this was right. I lived with Dad rent-free for 6 years, that was my compensation, so the estate should be split among the rest of them, and I should sign away any claim. It was only fair. I'd already got mine, 3 siblings, nodding in unison, and I said, before I sign anything, there's a letter Dad left with his lawyer that he asked to be read if this exact conversation ever happened. I think you should hear what he predicted you'd do. The nodding stopped. I had Ashby's copy and I read it to them. Our father's words, written years before from beyond his own death. To my children Grant, Marable, and Colton. If this letter is being read, it means you've done the thing I prayed you wouldn't, but feared you would. You've tried to cut your sister Delia out of my estate, or pressure her into giving up what I left her. So let me speak to you plainly, one last time. For 6 years, your sister gave up her entire life to care for me. She fed me and bathed me and nursed me and woke through the nights for me, while the 3 of you visited when it was convenient and told yourselves that was enough. I do not say this to shame you. Well, perhaps I do, a little because you have earned some shame. I say it because I need you to hear the truth before you dishonor it. Delia did not receive free housing. She gave up her home to move into mine so she could care for me around the clock. That was not her payment. That was her sacrifice. And if you are now telling her that her sacrifice was actually her salary, you are committing a lie so cruel that I am ashamed to have raised children capable of it. I left Delia the larder share, and the house, freely, in my sound mind, because it is just. She earned it not with schemes, but with 6 years of love and labor that none of you were willing to give. If you contest this, know that I anticipate you, that my lawyer has documented my clear intent and sound mind, and that you will not win, I have made sure of it. But more than that, know that I saw you do this. Whatever you tell yourselves, whatever story you build about fairness, I saw it coming from years away, because I know your characters, and I built this protection precisely because I knew that when the caregiving was over, the ones who gave nothing would come for everything. Delia, if you're hearing this, thank you. You were the child who showed up. Everything I could protect for you, I protected. Don't let them take it. I'm still looking out for you, even now. And to the 3 of you, I loved you. I love you still. But I will not let your greed rob the sister who earned this. Sign nothing, Delia. Your father already signed everything that matters. The room was silent. My siblings, who had walked in confident and coordinated, sat in the wreckage of a dead father's perfect foresight. Here is how it ended. The scheme collapsed entirely, because it had never had any legal power. It depended entirely on tricking me into signing away a claim that Dad's valid will had already secured. Once I understood what Dad had left me, and once his letter laid bare exactly what my siblings were doing, there was nothing for them to do. The will was valid. Dad's intent and capacity were documented by his longtime lawyer, and any contest they might have attempted was preemptively gutted by a letter in which the deceased predicted the contest and affirmed his sound mind. Dad had, quite literally, won the argument years before it happened. My siblings tried, briefly, the things people try, that Dad had been manipulated, that the letter proved I'd gotten in his ear, that they were being cheated. But the letter answered all of it in advance, in Dad's own clear voice, and their own coordinated scheme, exposed in the light, looked like exactly what it was. 3 children who gave nothing trying to rob the one who gave everything. He had no case, legally or morally, and they knew it. I received what Dad left me, the house I'd cared for him in, the larger share, the recognition he'd fought to give me. And more than the estate, I received the vindication of his letter. My father, seeing clearly, naming the truth of my 6 years against the lie my siblings tried to tell about them. He called it what it was: sacrifice, not salary, love, not scheming, and he made sure that truth would be spoken aloud, in the room, at the exact moment my siblings tried to bury it. My relationships with my siblings did not survive, and I've made a peace with that which is really just an acceptance. They had shown me definitively who they were, people who would gang up to rob their own sister of the recognition their father died wanting her to have. Would recast her deepest sacrifice as a debt already paid, who would choose money and each other over fairness in me. You cannot unknow that about people, even siblings, especially siblings. Grant, the eldest, never apologized. He nursed a grievance about the will until it hardened into permanent estrangement. Marable, I think, felt shame and reached out tentatively over the years, and we have a thin, careful relationship now, more truce than closeness. Colton drifted, as Colton always did. The family I was born into is mostly gone, and what replaced it is smaller and truer. Theodore Ashby, Dad's lawyer, I stayed grateful to, the keeper of Dad's foresight, the man who held the letter for years, waiting, and read it when the moment Dad predicted finally came. He told me something I've kept. In 30 years, I've watched a lot of families fight over estates. And the pattern almost never changes. The ones who did the caring get attacked by the ones who did nothing, because guilt curdles into greed, and the people who gave nothing can't stand to see the giver rewarded. Your father understood that better than any client I've had. He didn't just love you. He protected you with his eyes open from people he also loved. That's a rare and clear-eyed kind of love. It is, I feel it still. For 6 years, I cared for our dying father alone, while my 3 siblings lived their lives and visited when it was convenient. When he died, those same siblings ganged up to force me out of the inheritance, arguing that the free housing of living in Dad's home while I nursed him around the clock had already been my payment. Tried to recast my sacrifice as my salary, to take the deepest, hardest, most selfless thing I've ever done and reframe it as a perk I'd already collected, so they could rob me of the recognition our father died wanting me to have. 3 of them coordinated against one of me, ambushing the caregiver the moment the caregiving was done, but our father saw them coming. From years away, with clear and grieving eyes, he watched which children showed up and which children waited for the will, and he understood exactly what the waiting ones would do. And he prepared a valid will, a documented intent, and a letter that reached out of his own death to name their betrayal in his own voice, at the exact moment they attempted it. They walked into that room certain they'd already won, 3 against 1, armed with a lie about free housing and a document for me to sign. They forgot that the man they were robbing had known them their whole lives. He knew which of his children would hold his hand at the end, and which would hold out their hands at the reading of the will. And he made very sure that the daughter who showed up would not be robbed by the children who didn't, that her 6 years would be honored as the sacrifice they were, and not buried under the lie that they were a salary. Sign nothing, Delia. Your father already signed everything that matters. I signed nothing. And I kept the house I'd cared for him in and the recognition he fought from beyond the grave to give me. And the knowledge, worth more than any estate, that in a family that tried to reduce my love to a transaction my father saw it clearly, named it truly, and protected it completely. The caregiver is not the fool. She's just the one who was there. And sometimes, if she's lucky, the person she cared for was paying enough attention to make sure the world would finally know the difference. My father was paying attention, right up to the end and past it. And that is the last and greatest thing he ever gave me, not the house, but the truth, spoken in his own voice in a room full of people who tried to erase it. She showed up. She earned this. Don't you dare take it from her. They didn't. They couldn't, he'd made sure.